HRM 111. Study Session 1, Introduction to Behavioral Sciences. Introduction. Organizations are made up of people. An understanding of the behavior of people in organizations is vital to the survival of the organization and to the preservation of its mission. In this study session, you will be introduced to the concept of behavioral sciences. Essentially, it will expose you to the different fields of knowledge that make up the behavioral sciences as well as the factors that influence behavior in organizations. The meaning of behavioral sciences. Human experience in organizations offers a variety of simple and complex behavior that typically has a profound influence on the very survival of an organization. Organizations are goal-directed entities and the people who work in them are goal-directed individuals. For organizations to be effective, the goal-directed efforts or behavior of their people must be directed at achieving the goals of the organization. Igbino Monhia, 2011. Such direction is made possible only through an understanding of the critical behavioral patterns of the organization's people. Behavioral sciences attempt to provide that understanding. Behavioral sciences are a multidisciplinary approach to the study of human behavior. Broadly speaking, behavioral science is a collective term for the grouping of all social sciences concerned with the study of human or people's behavior. The contributing fields to behavioral sciences. Behavioral sciences is multidisciplinary. In other words, it is made up of a number of behavioral disciplines that include but are not limited to psychology, sociology, social psychology, anthropology, economics, and political science. Psychology. Psychology is the study of human behavior which tries to identify the characteristics of individuals and provides an understanding of why an individual behaves in a particular way. Psychology provides us with useful insights into areas such as personality, perceptual processes, human motivation, attitudes, and emotions. Sociology. Sociology is the study of social behavior, relationships among social groups and societies, and the maintenance of social order. The focus of sociologists is on the social system. Sociology helps us to appreciate the functioning of individuals within the organization, which is essentially a socio-technical entity. Social psychology. Social psychology is the study of human behavior in the context of social situations. Social psychology essentially addresses the problem of understanding the typical behavioral patterns to be expected from an individual when he takes part in a group. Anthropology. Anthropology is the science of mankind and the study of human behavior as a whole. The main focus of attention is on the cultural system, beliefs, ideas, and values within a group or society and the comparison of behavior among different cultures. Economics. Economics is the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means, which have alternative uses. Robbins, 1945. For any organization to survive, it must be aware of the economic viability of its efforts, be it a profit or not-for-profit organization. Political science. Political science is a social science concerned with the theory and practice of politics and the analysis of political systems and political behavior. It typically addresses the acquisition and distribution of power in a social setting. Political science provides useful insights into organizational conflicts, power, and politics. Influences on behavior in organization. According to Mullins, 2002, the following are collectively influence behavior in work organizations. The individual. Organizations are made up of individual members and the individual is the central feature of organizational behavior and a necessary part of any behavioral situation, whether acting in isolation or as part of a group, in response to expectations of the organization, or as a result of the influences of the external environment. The group. Groups are found in every organization and are essential to the working and performance of an organization. The organization comprises groups of people and almost everyone in an organization will belong to one group or the other. The organization. The individual and groups do not exist in isolation but interact within the structure of the formal organization. Management creates a structure to establish relationships between individuals and groups, to provide order and systems, and to direct the efforts of the organization into goal-seeking activities. The environment. Organizations themselves function within the broader context of the external environment. The environment affects the organization through such elements as technological and scientific development, economic activity, social and cultural factors, and governmental actions. Summary of Study Session 1. In this study session, please note the following. 1. Behavioral sciences are a multidisciplinary approach to the study of human behavior in work settings. 2. Behavioral sciences provide the understanding required to direct human behavior towards organizational goal attainment. 3. Behavioral sciences comprise fields of knowledge such as psychology, sociology, social psychology, anthropology, economics, and political science. 4. There are several factors that influence behavior in organizations, and these include the individual, the group, the organization itself, and the environment. Study Session 2, Personality. Introduction. Personality is a major part of the answer to the question of why people behave the way they do. It lies in the understanding of the human personality. This study session will give you an insight into the nature of human personality. Essentially, it will expose you to the factors that determine personality, how personality has been described, and how personality develops in the individual. The meaning of personality. Personality means different things to different persons. To some, personality connotes a person's general disposition, whether, for example, the person has a pleasant disposition or otherwise. Others tend to see personality as a single dominant characteristic, such as being assertive, passive, indifferent, or open. Thus, personality can be defined as the combination of stable physical and mental characteristics that give the individual his or her identity. James and Mazerole, 2002. It is also seen as the sum total of the typical ways of acting, thinking, and feeling that make each person unique. Leahy, 2004. The determinants of personality. Several factors are believed to be responsible for shaping an individual's personality. The major argument is whether personality is shaped by nature or by nurture. Available research has shown that personality is not determined by one single factor such as nature or nurture, but it is believed to be generally shaped by nature, heredity, and nurture, environment, but moderated by situational conditions. General factors that determine personality are nature. Heredity. Nature refers to those characteristics that were determined at conception. They are those characteristics we inherited from our parents. Attributes such as assertiveness, temperament, manner of expression, are believed to be either completely or substantially influenced by our parents. Robbins and Judge, 2009. It is for this reason that children often resemble their parents, a chip of the old block. Nurture. Environment. Apart from nature, nurture, or the environment in which an individual is raised, also plays a significant role in shaping personality. These environmental factors include the prevailing culture, our early childhood experiences, separation from mother, method of feeding, the norms among our family, a consequence of the birth order, first child/middle child/last child, friends, and social groups, and other influences that we experience through our adult life cycle. The situation. Though the situational condition is not necessarily a basic factor that shapes personality, it nevertheless influences the effects of nature and nurtures on personality. An individual's personality, although generally stable and consistent, does change in different situations. The different challenges of different situations will unveil different aspects of one's personality. Theories of personality. Personality theories are explanations that have been put forward to help us understand and describe human personality. Basically, these theories fall into the following. 1. Trait. 2. Psychoanalytic, and 3. The social learning theories. The trait theory. Traits are defined as relatively enduring patterns of behavior that are relatively consistent across situations. For example, if you say that a person has the trait of selfishness, it means that he is selfish at most times and that his selfishness does not change much as time goes by. The ideas about personality traits have been developed to the extent that they are considered theories of personality. Unlike other personality theories, trait theories are more concerned with describing traits rather than explaining their origin. Leahy, 2004. Some trait theories are considered below. Allport's trait theory. Allport, 1961, believed that the most important traits that could be used to describe, understand, and predict the behavior of people were those motivational traits related to our values. Allport believed that traits could be ranked in terms of their importance as cardinal, central, and secondary. Cardinal traits are those that dominate a person's life. Allport believed that the people who possessed cardinal traits are relatively few. Central traits, which Allport believed are much more common, are important traits that influence and organize much of our behavior. Psychoanalytic theory. The development and popularization of the psychoanalytic theory are credited to Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. To Freud, the answer to the question of individual personality lies in the human mind, particularly in that part the individual is scarcely aware of. Freud distinguished three levels of consciousness into the following ways. 1. Conscious mind. 2. The preconscious mind. 3. The unconscious mind. The first level, the conscious mind, this is the portion of the mind one is presently aware of. The second level is the preconscious mind, this is the portion of the mind containing information that is not presently conscious but can be easily brought to consciousness. The third level, the unconscious mind, this is the part of the mind of which you can never be directly aware. It is the storehouse of primitive instinctual motives and of memories and emotions that have been repressed. The contents of the unconscious mind are not normally accessible to consciousness. They can rarely be made fully conscious. According to Freud, the mind is like an iceberg. The conscious mind is merely the tip of the iceberg, whereas the greater part of the salient workings of the mind lies beneath the surface, hidden away from view. Freud also divided the mind into three parts in a different, but related way. He theorized that the mind is composed of the 1. ID, 2. The ego, and 3. The superego, and these three parts function differently. The social learning theory. The social learning theory has its origins in the writings of Ivan Pavlov, J.B. Watson, and B.F. Skinner. The social learning view of personality is vastly different from that of psychoanalysis. Social learning theorists focus on the psychological process of learning. To the social learning theorists, personality is simply something that is learned. They define personality as the sum total of ways we have learned to act, think and feel. Because personality is learned from our interactions with others, family, friends, and culture, the term social learning has been used. Social learning theorists argue that the key concepts in the study of personality are not the id, ego, or superego, but conditioned behavior and modeling. To them, personality is no more than learned behavior, and the way to understand personality is simply to understand the process of learning. In the social learning view, developing an adequate personality is contingent upon the type of models the individual is exposed to and the form of reinforcement he receives for his behavior. Personality development. When and how is a person's personality formed? There are quite a number of personality development theories that have attempted to provide an understanding and an explanation of how personality is formed in an individual. These personality development theories bring to light the various stages of development that personality passes through within the individual until it becomes fully developed. Two of such theories shall be examined. Argyris' 7 Dimensions of Personality Development. Chris Argyris, 1957, theorized that certain basic changes should occur in an individual's personality if he is to develop into a mature person. Argyris believed that these basic changes occur along 7 general dimensions or characteristics of immaturity to maturity. According to Argyris, in the development of a mature personality, an individual becomes increasingly active, moving from a passive state as an infant to an active state as an adult. Second, as an infant, an individual is dependent on others but becomes increasingly independent of others as maturity develops. Third, infants exhibit only a limited number of behaviors, whereas the behavioral patterns of an adult are extremely diverse. Fourth, the interests of an infant are shallow, temporary, and casual, whereas the interests of an adult are deeply ingrained. Fifth, the infant has a short time perspective, but as the person matures, he has an increasingly longer time perspective, both past and future. Sixth, the infant is subject to everyone, but the adult enjoys equality or superiority. Finally, the infant lacks self-awareness but increasingly moves to a state of self-awareness and self-control as an adult. Freud's theory of psychosexual development. Freud believes that personalities are formed as you pass through a series of developmental stages from infancy to adulthood. According to him, events that happen to us as we pass through these stages can be critical in the formation of our personality. Study Session 3, Perception and Attribution. Introduction. Perception generally concerns how people react to the events or objects they encounter, and it is a characteristic feature of behavior, which has particular importance to the manager. This study session will give you an insight into the nature of perception. Particularly, it will expose you to the process that perception goes through, the factors that influence perception, and some perceptual errors. The meaning of perception. Perception is one of the basic psychological processes that is fundamental to the understanding and analysis of behavior in organizations. As human beings, you see things in different ways. You see things, not necessarily the way things are, but the way you are, the way you want to see them. The organization is one place where the implications of differing perceptions readily come to light. Differences in perception are reflected through diverse forms of behavior that have managerial implications. Perception has been defined as a cognitive process that enables human beings to interpret and understand the surroundings. Kreitner and Konicki, 2004, 225. It is a process by which individuals interpret their sensory impressions in order to give meaning to their environment. Robbins and Judge, 2009. The perceptual process. The perceptual process is a sequence of steps that begins with the environment and leads to our perception of a stimulus and an action in response to the stimulus. It is an information processing sequence. Kreitner and Konicki, 2004, suggest that perception involves the following 4 stages, which are listed in the diagram below. Selective attention/comprehension. Perception is both a cognitive and a psychological process. Humans process the information they also receive from the environment through their senses. But you do not possess the cognitive capacity to fully process or comprehend the plethora of physical and social stimuli that inundate every moment. What you then do is to selectively perceive subsets of environment. You attend only to some of the environmental stimuli. Attention here means the process of becoming consciously aware of something or someone. You are likely to pay attention to those stimuli that tend to be salient or those stimuli we judge would have impact on us in one way or the other. Encoding and simplification. At this stage, the observed information is interpreted and translated into mental representation. To achieve this, perceivers assign pieces of information to cognitive categories. Cognitive categories are mental depositories for storing information. Storage and retention. This stage involves storage of information in long-term memory. The long-term memory is made up of 3 compartments, viz., events, semantic materials, and people. Events memory is composed of categories containing information about both specific and general events. Retrieval and response. Information is retrieved from memory when we make judgments and decisions. We base our judgments and decisions either on the process of drawing on, interpreting, and integrating categorical information stored in the long-term memory or on retrieving a summary judgment that was already made. Factors that influence perception. There are several factors that may combine to make people perceive the same thing differently. Such factors can reside in the perceiver, the individual, in the object that is being perceived, or in the context of the situation in which the perception is being made. The perceiver. The interpretation of what is being perceived is strongly influenced by the personal characteristics of the individual perceiver. Such characteristics include the individual's personality, attitude, motive, interests, goals, intelligence, ability, training, learning, past experiences, expectations, etc. The object. The characteristics of the object or target being perceived can also affect what is perceived. For example, an individual wearing a red color suit is more likely to be noticed in a group than any of the others wearing dark suits. Apart from colors, other characteristics of the object that may affect perception include novelty, proximity, similarity, sounds, intensity, repetition, size, motion, background, etc. The context of the situation. Also, the context in which you see the objects or events is important. The time or location at which an object is seen can influence attention. For example, a female student who wears a dinner gown to class on a Monday morning will certainly catch your attention. Light and heat are other situational factors that may influence perception. Social perception. When you perceive other people, you use available information about them to form impressions of them and assess what they are like. This process is through which you use available information to form impressions of other people is referred to as social perception. The organization is a social entity and the relationship between the perceiver and the perceived exists in a variety of organizational situations. Employees are continuously making impressions about one another in the organization. Subordinates perceive their supervisors and the supervisors perceive their subordinates. Factors involved in social perception. Swanda, 1979, identified 5 primary factors involved in social perception to include the following. Characteristics of the perceiver and the perceived. Characteristics possessed by parties involved in social interaction influence the perception of the perceiver. There is a tendency for the perceiver to use himself as a norm or standard to judge or perceive others. For example, our own characteristics tend to affect the characteristics we are likely to see in others. Thus traits that are important to us and ourselves will be used more when we form impressions of others. Similarly, the status and role of the perceived will influence judgments about his behavior. Stereotyping and halo effect. One way to simplify things is to organize people into groups. For each group, you have a stereotype, a fixed set of characteristics you tend to attribute to all group members. Stereotypes enable us to make quick judgments. Stereotyping has implications for the way organizational members or groups perceive one another. Media for perceiving others. There are several media for perceiving others in the organization. These media or cues operate in various ways in the organization. In addition to verbal cues, for example, a supervisor's tone in addressing a particular subordinate may summarize his disposition to the behavior of the subordinate, there are nonverbal cues. Interpersonal choice. Interpersonal choice shapes social perception in the organization through the acceptance or rejection of others as members of an informal group. The acceptance of others is influenced by such perceptual factors as physical proximity or nearness, the similarity of personality characteristics, and shared interests and values. Stability of the exchange. The interaction between the perceiver and the perceived is a dynamic process that is constantly undergoing changes and subject to external influences. The magnitude of these changes can either enhance or disrupt the stability of personal perception. Common perceptual errors. The following are some errors that may result from the perceptual process. Stereotyping. This enables you to organize people into useful categories and simplify a complex world. However, stereotyping could be misleading. Traits that are often generalized for a particular group of people may be evidence from an insignificant number of persons from that group. For example, is it indeed true that Benin women are troublesome, that Calabar women are flirtatious, or that Igbo women love money more than anything else? Halo effects occur when we draw a general impression about an individual on the basis of a single characteristic. Leniency. This is a personal characteristic that leads an individual to consistently evaluate other people or objects in an extremely positive fashion. Central tendency. This is the tendency to avoid all extreme judgments and rate people and objects as average or neutral. Contrast effects. The tendency to evaluate people by comparing them with characteristics of recently observed people who rank higher and lower on the same characteristics. The meaning of attribution. Attribution is the process through which you link behavior to its causes, to the intentions, dispositions, and events that explain why people act the way they do. Causal attributions are suspected or inferred causes of behavior. Kreitner and Kanicki, 2004. When we perceive people's behavior, we tend to attribute it to internal causes, dispositional, or external causes, situational. Dimensions of behavior used for attribution. Kelly, 1973. In his model of attribution hypothesis that people make causal attributions after gathering information about three dimensions of behavior: consensus, distinctiveness, and consistency. These dimensions are independent but their combination leads to differing attributions. Distinctiveness. This is determined by comparing a person's behavior on one task with his or her behavior on other tasks. Did the person perform differently on this task when compared to other tasks he has previously performed? Distinctiveness is concerned about generalization across situations. High distinctiveness means that the individual has performed the tasks in question in a significantly different manner than he or she has performed other tasks. Low distinctiveness means there is a relatively stable performance from one task to another. Distinctiveness relates to other tasks. Consensus involves a comparison in an individual's behavior with that of his or her peers. Do all or only a few people respond to the stimulus in the same way as the target person? Consensus asks about generalization across actors. There is high consensus when one acts like the rest of the group and low consensus when one acts differently. Consensus relates to other people. Consistency is determined by judging if the individual's performance on a given task is consistent over time. Consistency is concerned about generalization across time. High consistency means that a person performs a certain task the same, time after time. Low consistency means there is significant variability in the way the individual performs a given task over time. Consistency relates to time. Study Session 4, Emotions. Introduction. Emotion is a critical factor in the way people behave. How are you feeling right now? What is the neural basis for the different types of emotions we feel throughout our lives? In this study, we will discuss the components of emotion, the ways in which we express emotion, and the parts of the brain that are involved in emotional processing, regulation, and perception. The meaning of emotions. Emotions are intense feelings directed at something or someone. For feelings to qualify as emotions, they must be object-specific. By being object-specific, we mean that the feeling must be directed at someone or something. An individual may be happy because he won a lottery, or a parent may be angry at his ward. In both cases, there is a reason for the feeling, emotion, that is being expressed. Contrary to the rational pursuit of organizational goals as espoused by bureaucratic concepts, emotions are an inseparable part of everyday life, and when employees leave for work every morning they take their emotions along. Types of emotions. There are literally dozens of emotions. Generating a long list of emotions without some form of categorization will do little good in the attempt to better understand and explain behavior in organizations. Thus, you consider Lazarus, 1991, and Parrott, 2001, Typologies of Emotions. Lazarus' Typology of Emotions. Lazarus, 1991, emphasizes that emotions center on a person's goal. He asserts that the emotions employees project in organizations, whether overt or covert, relates to the extent to which the particular experience is in congruence to the goals that they seek. Based on this assertion, Lazarus distinguishes between two categories of emotions, which are 1. Positive and 2. Negative. Positive emotions. Positive emotions are those emotions that are in congruence, or consistent, with an important life goal of the individual. Examples are happiness/joy, pride, love/affection, and relief. Positive emotions express a favorable evaluation or feeling. Negative emotions. Negative emotions describe emotions that are triggered by frustrations and failures when pursuing one's goals. Examples include anger, fright/anxiety, guilt/shame, sadness, envy/jealousy, and disgust. Negative emotions express an unfavorable evaluation or feeling. Dimensions of emotions. Every emotion can be evaluated on the basis of some dimensions. 3 of such dimensions tend to stand out. Valence. Valence is the extent to which the emotion could be described as being positive or negative. For example, the valence of emotions such as calmness, love, compassion, ecstasy, and hope could be described as positive, whereas, the valence of anger, boredom, disappointment, fear, and frustration would be negative. Activation. Activation is the degree to which the emotion arouses the individual, puts the individual in a ready-to-act state, or relaxes him. Anger, anxiety, and admiration, for example, could be described as aroused emotions. Power. Power is the extent to which the emotion is dominant or submissive. It could be seen as the degree to which the emotion is noticeable to others. Jealousy and envy are 2 examples of emotions that could be very submissive until they translate to more noticeable emotions such as contempt or anger. Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence as defined by Kreitner and Konicki, 2004, 175, is the ability to manage oneself and one's relationships in mature and constructive ways. Robbins and Judge, 2009, refer to it as one's ability to detect and manage emotional cues and information. Emotional information is all around us and they communicate basic feeling states from one individual to another. An emotionally intelligent manager, for example, should be able to perceive and process emotional information coming from his employees. Emotional intelligence can boost individual, group, and organizational effectiveness. Components of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence comprises 5 components, which are the first 3 relates to personal competence, while the last 2 relate to social competence. Self-awareness. Self-awareness consists of the following competencies. 1. Emotional competence, the ability to recognize one's emotions and their effects. 2. Accurate self-assessment, the ability to know one's strengths and limits. 3. Self-confidence, this competence captures the degree of sureness about one's self-worth and capabilities. Self-regulation/management. Self-regulation/management consists of the following competencies. 1. Self-control, is the ability to manage one's disruptive emotions and impulses. 2. Trustworthiness, is the ability to maintain standards of honesty and integrity. 3. Conscientiousness, is the ability to take responsibility for personal performance. 4. Adaptability, is the ability to be flexible in handling change. 5. Innovativeness, is the ability to be comfortable with and open to novel ideas and new information. Self-motivation. Self-motivation consists of the following competencies. 1. Achievement drive, is striving to improve or meet a standard of excellence. 2. Commitment, means aligning with the goals of the group or organization. 3. Initiative, is the readiness to act on opportunities. 4. Optimism, is showing persistence in pursuing goals despite obstacles and setbacks. Social awareness. Social awareness consists of the following competencies. 1. Empathy, is sensing other people's feelings and perspectives, and taking an active interest in their concerns. 2. Service orientation, is anticipating, recognizing, and meeting customers' needs. 3. Developing others, is sensing what others need in order to develop and bolster their abilities. 4. Leveraging diversity, is cultivating opportunities through diverse people. 5. Political awareness, is reading a group's emotional currents and power relationships. Social skills. Social skills consist of the following competencies. 1. Influence, is wielding effective tactics for persuasion. 2. Communication, is sending clear and convincing messages. 3. Leadership is inspiring and guiding groups and people. 4. Change catalyst, is initiating or managing change. 5. Conflict management, is negotiating and resolving disagreements. 6. Building bonds, is nurturing instrumental relationships. 7. Collaboration and cooperation are working with others towards shared goals. 8. Team capabilities, is creating group synergies and pursuing collective goals. Summary of Study Session 4. In this study session, please note the following. 1. Emotions are intense feelings directed at something or someone. For feelings to qualify as emotions, they must be object-specific. 2. There are many types of emotions and several attempts have been made to categorize them. Notable among these are Lazarus, 1991, and Parrott, 2001, Typologies of Emotions. 3. One useful way of understanding all emotions is to evaluate them on the basis of valence, activation, and power. 4. Emotional intelligence is the ability of an individual to detect and manage emotional cues and information. 5. To be emotionally intelligent requires personal competence, self-awareness, self-management, and self-motivation, and social competence, social awareness and social skills. Study Session 5, Frustration, Anxiety and Defense Mechanisms. Introduction. Anxiety frustration can come and go rarely, occur frequently, or persist indefinitely. For example, you may feel easily frustrated once in a while and not that often, feel easily frustrated off and on, or feel frustrated all the time. Anxiety frustration may precede, accompany, or follow an escalation of other anxiety sensations and symptoms, or occur by itself. Anxiety frustration can precede, accompany, or follow an episode of nervousness, anxiety, fear, and elevated stress, or occur out of the blue and for no apparent reason. Anxiety frustration can range in intensity from slight to moderate, to severe. It can also come in waves, where it's strong one moment and eases off the next. The meaning of frustration. As human beings, your behaviors are goal-directed. You behave in order to. You strive to gratify your wants and desires, your goals, aims, and ambitions. People join work organizations in order to meet one form of need or the other. However, it is not in every instance that the goal-directed behavior of the individual yields the desired result. Sources of frustration. Sources of frustration could be divided into two, which are: internal sources are in the form of personal limitations. External sources are factors that induce frustration but lie entirely out of the control of the individual. In the organization, several conditions or circumstances can induce frustration in workers. For example, working with an obstinate boss could be very frustrating. Obisi, 2003, identifies the following as the major sources of frustration in the Nigerian workplace. 1. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. 2. Godfatherism. 3. Poor pay. 4. Misplacement of rewards. 5. Tribalism. 6. Lack of training. 7. Lack of promotion. 8. Lack of facilities. 9. Other corrupt practices. To this you can add poor supervision, incompetent or nonchalant coworkers, work overload, ambiguous goals. Frustration is not a state that should be considered entirely undesirable. In short, without some frustration or discomfort, you would never be motivated to change. Every human being experiences frustration. It is how you handle your frustration that is important. If you are unable to constructively cope and deal with a lifelong series of obstacles in your life, your goals will go unmet permanently. However, if you are able to seize the opportunity to learn, change, and grow, obstacles will be overcome and goals met, leading to a number of gratifying rewards. Reactions to frustration. Generally, there are two possible categories of reactions to frustration which Positive or constructive reactions to frustration. A positive or constructive reaction to frustration means that the individual refuses to be overwhelmed by the frustrating circumstance but instead, demonstrates a determination to reach his desired goal or end state. Some constructive reactions to frustration include intensified striving. When the goal-directed behavior of the individual is blocked, the individual strives more to achieve the goal instead of giving up. Changing the means to goals/restructuring. When the goal-directed behavior of the individual is blocked, the individual can react by adopting other means towards goal achievement. In other words, the individual replaces the previous means that have failed with other means. Goal substitution. Where goals are consistently unachievable, the individual can substitute the goal for one that is achievable. Negative or disruptive reactions to frustration. The individual may become overwhelmed with the frustrating situation and reacts negatively to it. Negative reactions to frustration can have severe psychological consequences for the individual and cause dysfunction in the organization. Some disruptive reactions to frustration include aggression. Aggression is when the individual engages in attack behavior as a result of the frustrating circumstance. This could be in the form of verbally abusing a superior or colleagues, or even physically attacking them. Aggression could also be misplaced. Misplaced aggression occurs when the frustrated individual directs his anger to other sources, other innocent people like colleagues, subordinates, or customers, rather than the real source of the frustration, e.g. his boss. Fixation. Fixation is stagnation in behavior. The frustrated individual is unwilling or unable to learn new ways or new work methods, principles, or ideas that may enable him to deal with the frustrating circumstances. Instead, he keeps reapplying the same methods that have proved ineffective in resolving the problem in the past. Withdrawal. This is the ultimate negative reaction to frustration. The individual gives up when faced with a frustrating circumstance. Anxiety. Frustration and conflict often induce anxiety in the individual. Anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear. Anxiety creates psychological disorganization in the individual. The anxious person is typically unstable and unfocused. In Sigmund Freud's model of personality, the ego is the aspect of personality that deals with reality. Anxiety results when the ego cannot deal with the demands of our desires, the constraints of reality, and our own moral standards. According to Freud, anxiety is an unpleasant inner state that people seek to avoid. Anxiety acts as a signal to the ego that things are not going right. Types of anxiety. Freud identified 3 types of anxiety, namely neurotic anxiety. This is the unconscious worry that we will lose control of the id's urges, resulting in punishment for inappropriate behavior. Reality anxiety. This is the fear of real-world events. The cause of this anxiety is usually easily identified. For example, a person might fear being knocked down by a vehicle whenever they attempt to cross a busy road. The most common way of reducing this anxiety is to avoid threatening objects or situations. Moral anxiety. This involves a fear of violating our own moral principles. Defense mechanisms. When anxiety sets in, the individual strives to regain stability and focus. To do this, he or she adopts some coping mechanism which becomes a habituated pattern of behavior or conduct. Thus, defense mechanisms are a habituated pattern of behavior employed by the individual to cope with the psychological disorganization resulting from anxiety in the situation. While all defense mechanisms can be unhealthy, they can also be adaptive and allow us to function normally. The greatest problems arise when defense mechanisms are overused in order to avoid dealing with problems. The following are some defense mechanisms described by Anna Freud. I. Denial. 2. Repression. 3. Displacement. 4. Sublimation. V. Projection. 5. Intellectualization. 7. Rationalization. 8. Regression. 9. Reaction formation. Summary of Study Session 5. In this study session, you have learned that 1. As human beings, our behaviors are goal-directed. 2. Frustration is the thwarting of the goal-directed behavior of the individual. 3. Sources of frustration could be internal or external. Internal sources are in the form of personal limitations while external sources are factors that lie entirely out of the control of the individual. 4. There are 2 possible categories of reactions to frustration: positive, constructive, reactions, and negative, disruptive, reactions. 5. Anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear, and the types include neurotic, reality, and moral. Study Session 6, Learning. Introduction. Learning is a very important psychological process that has implications for human behavior. People learn continuously throughout their lives, and much of who you are, or what you are able to do, has come through one learning experience or the other. This study session will expose you to the nature of learning, particularly, the theories that describe learning as well as the importance of learning. You will also gain an insight into the different domains of learning and the principles of learning. The meaning of learning. Organizations are possible because organizational members are able to learn the way of the organization, in terms of the kind of attitude, orientations, values, knowledge, skills, abilities, and interactions that are needed to ensure that the organization delivers competitive market value. Learning is any relatively permanent change in behavior brought about through experience. Leahy, 2004. Learning can also be defined as the process by which experience or practice results in a relatively permanent change in behavior or potential behavior. Morris, 1996. Luthans, 1973, emphasizes 4 central points in defining learning. 1. Learning involves a change, though not necessarily an improvement, in behavior. 2. The change in behavior must be relatively permanent in order to be considered learning. 3. Some form of practice or experience is necessary for learning to occur. This criterion rules out behavior change that is the result of physical maturation. For example, the ability to crawl or walk is largely based on physical maturation and would not be considered learning. 4. The practice or experience must be reinforced in some way in order for learning to occur. If the practice or experience is not accompanied by some form of reinforcement, the behavior will eventually disappear. The importance of learning. Behavior in the organization is significantly influenced through learning, and because learning could result in desirable and undesirable behaviors in the organization, behavior modification through learning is a critical concern in the management of people in organizations. Learned behavior patterns are flexible and always changing. An understanding of how these patterns are formed will enable the manager to influence the behavior of subordinates, peers, and even superiors. Thus, an effective manager is one that is able to stimulate and reinforce desirable performance, while the ineffective manager causes subordinate behavior to develop in the wrong direction. Swanda, 1979. In order to stimulate and reinforce desirable behavior, the manager must know which kind of behavior is appropriate in a given set of circumstances. Thus, Mullins, 2002, quoting Burgoyne, Cunningham, Garrett, Honey, Mayo, Mumford, Pern, and Pedler, 1999, highlights the following as some of the benefits of learning for organizations. 1. Learning increases the capacity of organizational members to contribute to the success of the organization. 2. Learning enables the organization to be more effective in meeting its goals. 3. Learning emancipates the organization through the classification of purpose, vision, values, and behavior. 4. A focus on learning, planned and unplanned, formal and informal, produces a wider range of solutions to organizational issues. 5. Learning helps to achieve a better balance between long-term organizational effectiveness and short-term organizational efficiency. The theories of learning attempt to explain the process by which we acquire patterns of behavior. These theories essentially include classical conditioning. Classical conditioning grew out of the experiments conducted by the Russian physiologist, Ivan Pavlov, to teach dogs to salivate in response to the ringing of a bell. A simple surgical procedure allowed Pavlov to measure accurately the amount of saliva secreted by a dog. Pavlov began his experiment by presenting the dog with a piece of meat, and the dog exhibited a noticeable increase in salivation. When Pavlov withheld the presentation of meat and merely rang a bell, the dog did not salivate. Pavlov then proceeded to link the meat and the ringing of the bell. After repeatedly hearing the bell before getting the food, the dog began to salivate as soon as the bell rang. After a while, the dog salivated merely to the sound of the bell, even when no food was offered. In effect, the dog has learned to respond, salivate, to the bell. In Pavlov's experiment, the meat is described as an unconditioned stimulus, which invariably caused the dog to react in a specific way. The reaction that took place whenever the unconditioned stimulus occurred was referred to as the unconditional response, increase in the amount of salivation. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning presents the thesis that behavior is a function of its consequences. People learn to behave to get something they want or to avoid something they do not want. Operant behavior means voluntary or learned behavior in contrast to reflexive or unlearned behavior. The tendency to repeat such behavior is influenced by the reinforcement or lack of reinforcement brought about by the consequences of the behavior. Thus, reinforcement strengthens behavior and increases the likelihood that it will be repeated. B.F. Skinner pioneered operant conditioning. Skinner argued that people will most likely engage in desired behaviors if they are positively reinforced for doing so, that rewards are most effective if they immediately follow the desired response, and that behavior that is not rewarded, or is punished, is less likely to be repeated. For Skinner, stimulus follows the response. Social learning. Social learning theory holds the view that we learn by observing what happens to other people as well as through direct experiences. Much of what we have learned comes from watching models, our parents, teacher, peers, celebrities, bosses, etc. Social learning could be seen as an extension of operant conditioning in that it assumes that behavior is a function of consequences. It goes further, however, to acknowledge the existence of observational learning and the importance of perception in learning. 4 processes have been found to determine the influence that a model will have on an individual, which include 1. Attention processes. People learn from a model only when they recognize and pay attention to its critical features. Individuals tend to be most influenced by models that are attractive, repeatedly available, important to us, or similar to us in our estimation. 2. Retention processes. The extent to which a model influences an individual depends largely on how well the individual remembers the model's action after the model is no longer available. 3. Motor reproduction processes. After a person has seen a new behavior by observing the model, the watching or observation must be converted to doing. This process then demonstrates that the individual can perform the modeled activities. 4. Motivation processes. The decision to reproduce, or refrain from reproducing, an observed behavior is dependent on the motivations and expectations of the observer, including anticipated consequences and internal standards. Domain of learning. Bloom, 1956, identified the following as the 3 domains of learning. 1. Cognitive domain, concerns mental skills, knowledge. 2. Affective domain, concerns growth in feelings or emotional areas, attitude. 3. Psychomotor domain, concerns manual or physical skills. Cognitive domain. The cognitive domain, according to Bloom, 1956, involves knowledge and the development of intellectual skills. This generally includes the recall or recognition of specific facts, procedural patterns, and concepts that serve in the development of intellectual abilities and skills. This domain has 6 major categories arranged in the order of complexity from knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, to evaluation. The first one must be mastered before the next one can take place. Affective domain. The affective domain includes the manner in which we deal with things emotionally, such as feelings, values, appreciation, enthusiasms, motivations, and attitudes. The 5 major categories under this domain, from the simplest behavior to the most complex, include receiving phenomena, responding to phenomena, valuing, organization, and internalizing values. Characterization. Psychomotor domain. The psychomotor domain includes physical movement, coordination, and use of the motor skill areas. Development of these skills requires practice and is measured in terms of speed, precision, distance, procedures, or techniques in execution. The 7 major categories under the psychomotor domain, from the simplest behavior to the most complex, include perception, set, guided response, mechanism, complex overt response, adaptation, and origination. Learning styles. The literature on learning is replete with several classifications of learning styles. Classifications are often based on the writer's background, inclinations, and orientations. You will adopt a classification of learning styles by David Kolb. Kolb, 1984, identifies 4 different styles of learning described below. Divergers, concrete experiencer/reflective observer. Divergers take experiences and think deeply about them, thus diverging from a single experience to multiple possibilities in terms of what this might mean. They like to ask why, and will start from the tiniest detail to constructively work up to the big picture. They enjoy participating and working with others but are uncomfortable with states of disequilibrium and conflicts. They are generally influenced by other people and like to receive constructive feedback. They like to learn through logical instruction or hands-on exploration with conversations that lead to discovery. Convergers, abstract conceptualization/active experimenter. Convergers think about things and then try out their ideas to see if they work in practice. They like to ask how about a situation, understanding how things work in practice. They like facts and will seek to make things efficient by making small and careful changes. They prefer to work by themselves, thinking carefully and acting independently. They learn through interaction, and computer-based learning is more effective with them than other methods. Accommodators, concrete experiencer/active experimenter. Accommodators have the most hands-on approach, with a strong preference for doing rather than thinking. They like to ask what if, and why not, to support their action-first approach. They do not like routine and will take creative risks to see what happens. They like to explore complexity by direct interaction and learn better by themselves than with other people. They prefer hands-on and practical learning to lectures. Assimilators, abstract conceptualizer/reflective observer. Assimilators have the most cognitive approach to learning, preferring to think than to act. They ask what is there I can know? And like organized and structured understanding. They prefer lectures for learning, with demonstrations where possible, and will respect the knowledge of experts. They will also learn through conversation that takes a logical and thoughtful approach. Principles of Effective Learning. Ploros, 2009, identifies the following as the 10 principles of effective learning. 1. Learners need to know where they are going and have a sense of progress towards their objectives. 2. The learning environment has to be one of trust, respect, openness, and acceptance of differences. 3. Being aware of and owning the responsibility for learning lies with the learner. Others can only give information and support, and provide feedback. 4. Learners need to participate actively in the learning process. 5. Learning should be related to and use the learner's experience and knowledge. 6. Learning is not only a basic capability but also a group of skills that can be developed and or learned. 7. Facts, concepts, and skills are learned in different ways. 8. Getting ideas wrong can be a valuable aid to developing understanding. 9. For learning to be processed and assimilated, time must be allowed for reflection. 10. Effective learning depends on realistic, objective, and constructive feedback. Summary of Study Session 6. In this study session, please note the following. 1. Learning is the process by which experience or practice results in a relatively permanent change in behavior or potential behavior. 2. Learning increases the capacity of organizational members to contribute to the success of the organization, thus enabling the organization to be more effective in meeting its goals. 3. There are basically 3 theories of learning: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social learning. 4. Learning takes place in 3 domains: the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor domain. Study Session 7, Attitudes, Job Satisfaction, and Alienation. Introduction. If you happen to be a manager, then you should be interested in your employees' attitudes, because attitudes give warnings of potential problems and because they influence behavior. Satisfied and committed employees, for instance, have lower rates of turnover, absenteeism, and withdrawal behaviors. They also perform better on the job. Given that managers want to keep resignations and absences down, especially among their most productive employees, they'll want to do things that generate positive job attitudes. As one review put it, a sound measurement of overall job attitude is one of the most useful pieces of information an organization can have about its employees. The meaning of attitudes. Attitudes are a learned predisposition to respond in a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner. Attitudes can also be seen as the propensities, or tendencies, to react in a favorable or unfavorable way toward an object. The object could be almost anything in the world around us. Attitudes reflect a person's likes and dislike toward other persons, objects, events, and activities in their environment. Attitudes always apply to some identifiable object. Thus, it is not technically accurate to say that someone has a good attitude or bad attitude without specifying the object of the attitude. The psychological functions of attitudes. Some of the useful psychological functions that attitudes perform for people include the following. 1. They provide a frame of reference. Attitudes help us to make sense of the world by giving us a frame of reference from which to interpret our world. 2. People express values through their attitudes. Words and actions demonstrate our values and allow us to share them with others and to affect the world in which we live. 3. Attitudes help us protect our ego. Attitudes help us to maintain our self-image and self-respect. 4. Attitudes can facilitate reconciling contradictions. Most of us have some contradictory attitudes or beliefs, yet, in many instances, these inconsistencies do not cause us to feel uneasy or have a sense of dissonance. 5. Attitudes aid in the personal adjustment. We tend to develop attitudes consistent with those parts of our life we find satisfying or dissatisfying. In other words, we tend to develop favorable attitudes towards those aspects of our life we find satisfying and unfavorable attitudes towards those aspects of our life we find dissatisfying. Components. Attitudes. Attitudes are tied to values and beliefs, and they precede intentions to behave in actual behavior. Attitudes can be more easily understood if they are viewed in terms of their components and their dynamics. These three components are affective, cognitive, and behavioral. Affective component. The affective component of an attitude contains the feelings or emotions an individual has about an object or situation. In other words, the affective component is the emotional tone generated by or toward the object of the attitude. What it simply means is that the individual has some preference like or dislike toward the object. Affect can also be neutral when the individual feels indifferent about the object or situation. The cognitive component. The cognitive dimensions of attitude represent the beliefs and ideas one has about an object or situation. It is possible that in the workplace, individuals will have a different set of beliefs, say about the job, and this will have implications for whether or not they express positive or negative attitudes about the job. This variation in the cognitive component of attitude depends in large part upon the personality of the individual and how they view the world. The behavioral component. Attitudes often lead to overt behaviors, but not always. Except for behavior, all other aspects of attitudes are internal to the person, they are not observable. The behavioral component refers to how the individual acts or intends to act toward the object or situation. Key work attitudes. Individuals have attitudes towards the work that they do. To a large extent, these attitudes inform their behavior at work and determine whether or not they are able to experience work as satisfying and fulfilling, or dissatisfying and despairing. There are different types of attitudes that people have towards the work they do. Basic among these are job satisfaction. Job satisfaction is a term that describes a positive feeling about a job, resulting from an evaluation of its characteristics. Robbins and Judge, 2009. Locke, 1976, defined it as a pleasurable or positive emotional state resulting from the appraisal of one's job or job experiences. This definition implies that job satisfaction is not a unitary concept, but rather, that it is possible for an individual to be relatively satisfied with one aspect of his or her job and dissatisfied with one or more other aspects. An individual with a high level of job satisfaction holds positive feelings about his or her job, while an individual with a low level of job satisfaction holds negative feelings about the job. Job involvement. Job involvement is related to job satisfaction. Job involvement is referred to as the degree to which one is cognitively preoccupied with and concerned with one's present job. Paul Lee, Alliger, and Stone Romeo, 1994. Job involvement is manifested in the extent to which people are immersed in their tasks. Individuals with a high level of job involvement strongly identify with and really care about the kind of job that they do. Organizational commitment. Organizational commitment reflects the extent to which an individual identifies with an organization and is committed to its goals and wishes to maintain membership in the organization. While an individual with a high job involvement strongly identifies with his job, an organizationally committed individual identifies strongly with his employing organization. Organizational commitment has three dimensions. 1. Affective. 2. Continuance. 3. Normative. Affective commitment. Affective commitment is an emotional attachment to the organization and a belief in its values. Continuance commitment. Continuance commitment means that the individual stays with an organization because he feels he cannot afford to leave. It is the perceived economic value of remaining with an organization compared to leaving it. Normative commitment. Normative commitment is an obligation to remain with an organization for moral or ethical reasons. For example, an individual who has worked with an organization for many years may feel a moral obligation to remain with the organization in times of severe financial problems. Factors that influence job satisfaction. Robbins and Judge, 2009. Note: that people often mean job satisfaction when they talk about employee attitudes. Positive or negative attitudes towards work often relate to high or low job satisfaction. Sari and Judge, 2004, identify 3 factors that influence the degree to which an individual experiences job satisfaction. The factors are: I. Dispositional influences. 2. Cultural influences. 3. Work situation influences. Consequences of job satisfaction. Job satisfaction and dissatisfaction have consequences for the organization. The consequential pattern is such that high job satisfaction impacts the organization positively while poor job satisfaction impact negatively. The following are some of the consequences of a job. Robbins and Judge, 2009, Kreitner and Konicki, 2004. Motivation. According to Kreitner and Konicki, 2004, recent research evidence has revealed a significant positive relationship between motivation and job satisfaction. The implication of this finding is that an employee who is satisfied on the job will also be motivated to contribute positively to the organization. Job performance. 2 key findings according to Kreitner and Konicki, 2004, have shown that first, job satisfaction and performance are moderately related. Second, the relationship between job satisfaction and performance is much more complex than originally thought. They do not bear a simple reciprocal linear relationship. Rather, researchers now believe that both variables indirectly influence each other through a host of individual differences and work environment characteristics. Harder, Schmidt, and Hayes, 2002. Organizational citizenship behavior, OCB. Job satisfaction is a major determinant of an employee's citizenship behavior, OCB. OCB consists of employee behaviors that are beyond the call of duty. Satisfied employees are more likely to talk positively about the organization, help others, and go beyond the normal expectations in their jobs. Research has shown a moderately positive correlation between organizational citizenship behavior and job satisfaction. Lapine, Erez, and Johnson, 2002. Customer satisfaction. Available evidence suggests that satisfied employees increase customer satisfaction and loyalty. This finding is particularly important for service organizations where employees have to interact directly with customers. The meaning of alienation. When individuals fail to find fulfillment and satisfaction in the job that they do, they may experience alienation. Marx describes it as a separation of things that are naturally together, or to put antagonism between things that are perfectly in harmony. Within the organizational context, an employee is said to be alienated from his work if he can no longer find meaning in it, if considers himself to have inevitably lost control over his life and destiny by being deprived of control over his actions. Dimensions of alienation. The sociologist Seaman, 1959, provided 6 dimensions by which alienation could be analyzed. These dimensions are: 1. Powerlessness. 2. Normlessness. 3. Meaninglessness. 4. Cultural estrangement. 5. Self-estrangement. 6. Social isolation. Summary of Study Session 7. In this study session, please note the following. 1. Attitudes are our propensities, or tendencies, to react in a favorable or unfavorable way toward an object. 2. Work attitudes are evaluative statements about work. In other words, work attitudes express a favorable or unfavorable disposition towards the work that people do. 3. Attitudes have 3 components: affective, cognitive, and behavioral. 4. Major work attitudes include job satisfaction, job involvement, and organizational commitment. 5. A major work attitude is job satisfaction, which is a term that describes a positive feeling about a job, resulting from an evaluation of its characteristics.